Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us in this first Global Dialogue Lab of 2018. And our theme for this year is going to be, what is sacred activism? And we feel that's an important topic right now. There's a lot of movement toward bringing the sacred into activism and thinking about how the nature of change making changes when we start from a respect for and an awareness of that which is sacred. But it raises a lot of questions. What does this really mean? And so we're planning to invite a variety of change makers. We will have Cynthia Jures, Ankh Chabalala, as well as probably Sabina Lichtenfels, different people who are engaging in sacred activism.
As you maybe, the one of you who took part in One World Bearing Witness, you maybe are aware of some of the names you just mentioned.
Yeah, that's right. Some of them were part of One World Bearing Witness. And we'll be reaching out beyond that in order to try to get as multifaceted a perspective on sacred activism as we can, in order to try to build a collective awareness of what this is, and new insights on how to engage in change making in this way. So this call is an introductory call where where Thomas and I are going to speak about why we're doing this, what this is all about, and we will talk together for maybe about 45 minutes, and then we'll invite you to be in dialogue with us, and to have a conversation together. And we would like to actually have that conversation be a one conversation that continues together on this topic, and then we'll break everyone up into small groups for deeper discussion. And we have a Facebook page, the Global Dialogue Lab, that you can find if you would like to join there, and for ongoing discussion when we're not here together. And the Global Dialogue Lab happens the first Friday of every month. On rare occasions, it's the second Friday or some other Friday, but basically it's the first Friday of every month, and on Zoom like this. And you are always welcome to join us. And if you have suggestions for people who you think we should be speaking to, if you have suggestions for processes we should try, we're open. This is an experiment that we would like to have all of us be participating in. So I'm Elizabeth Diebold, and this is Thomas Steininger.
And it's great to be together with all of you. And I would like to start the conversation with the simple and obvious question: what do we mean when we say sacred activism? What is this? So I'm sure many of us have an idea about sacred activism, but I think it's worth really diving into what this could be, what its potential could be, the dimension of sacred activism, why this combination of words, sacred and activism. And maybe you would like to start.
Sure. I mean, it was interesting because when I wrote the email about this call, I thought about the pipeline protests or the water protectors, to make an important distinction, that the water protectors in North Dakota were basically saying, we want to defend the sacred. We want to defend the sacred from being destroyed by this pipeline, and that meant a sacred water, a sacred place. So they were speaking about the sacred as something very concrete. And we know that there are sacred places, power places, places that have been given through just the nature of the place, or through human prayer, have developed a certain quality to them that touches one and brings one into a relationship with something deeper and bigger. That is a kind of sacred activism, to protect and defend those kinds of places. But I think there are a lot of different ways of thinking about sacredness and activism. And I think the way that I tend to think about it is that the sacredness is a reference to wholeness. It's an activism, or a way of trying to think about making change that starts from a recognition that there is a prior unity, that there is a wholeness to life and to our being together on this planet and with the planet, that is a very dramatically different ground for making change than trying to stand against something.
When I think about the term sacred activism, there are two dimensions that I find very interesting, and they are all held together by a single point: the realness of the sacred. Because sacred activism really just gives acknowledgement that there is something which is sacred, and that in itself, particularly if you talk about it in the terms of activism, is not a given thing. Because in our secular time, to talk about that there is something sacred, and we even can talk about what do we mean. But I honestly think it's not even so important to agree exactly what this sacred is. It's much more important that we honor that there is something that is worth being called sacred, because that's already a lot. If you really slow down and look, the word sacred is a word that is more a taboo zone than other taboo zones that we are aware. It's in a kind of a, I mean, in New Age field, that's different, but in the usual secular society context, to talk about the sacred it is often not something that is a given. And and then that the two dimensions that I meant are, one, that this is an activism that somehow is about the sacred. You mentioned sacred places, sacred dimension, sacred relationships. And you mentioned the American indigenous battle that they had about these oil lines, but these are our sacred grounds, and defend the sacred as a slogan. That's one dimension that I find very intriguing and worth thinking about. There are things that are sacred that need our activism. They not only need my spiritual practice, they need our activism. And just to see it that way, that activism, sacredness needs us. It needs us being active out there. That's the one dimension. And the other dimension is, which of course is very related, that when we talk about activism, that there's a certain kind of activism that has a certain quality that is sacred. Because there can be political activism, there can ecological activism, there can be feminist activism. That does not necessarily mean at all that the way I'm active is in a way of honoring the sacred. So that it's kind of the mode of activism that maybe is different. And really to ask, is there a way of activism that is not only about sacredness, but in the way that we are active honors the sacred and works with the sacred, so that the mode of activism holds a particular dimension that maybe is not so easy to see. It's maybe more subtle to be aware of, because it's to really fight for justice, to really fight for social rights. It's something sometimes very concrete. But what does it mean to do this in a way that, in the way we are doing it, is holding the sacred and the other dimension is for the sacred. So these are these dimensions that I find very interesting in contemplating what sacred activism is.
Yeah, and I think that I mean it brings to mind. I mean, what part of what you're saying is where are the activists coming from in their in wanting to create change, and what's the point of the change making in a sense also? How does that embody or bring alive the sacred? And just to, you mentioned secular society. I mean, we really at a global level, at a globalization level, we live in a culture that is that really holds very little sacred, or doesn't hold, that actually is has been built on denying that there is anything that is in this special category of sacredness. And yet it also seems that every human being, or most human beings, it's hard to say, have something that they would call or consider to be sacred, to be something, and that meaning to be something that is, you could say, without which human life is impoverished. Our deepest, most profound core sense of what it means to be alive, or human, or part of the biosphere. How is it? What is the sacred is something that connects us to that which is indivisible, that which is beyond all of us, and that holds everything. And how do we, in a culture that sort of has more of an instrumental relationship to everything on the planet, seeing human beings and seeing sentient life forms and seeing the earth as a source of resource rather than as a whole, or as wholes within wholes that have a living integrity that needs to be honored. Bringing how we stand in relationship to the or upholding the sacred in a context like that, it seems to me to be critically important.
And also to illustrate that more, I think it's helpful to think about this one big event that we did now. What is it? 1 month ago?
Almost exactly a month ago.
Exactly a month ago, One World Bearing Witness. Because to my understanding, and as I know also to your understanding, this was a form of sacred activism. Right. That was at least our intention to do that. And what do we mean by saying that? It always sounds beautiful, sacred activism is a beautiful word. At least to me it sounds beautiful. But what do we mean that this was a form of sacred activism? I think for the ones of you who saw that or saw part of it, it makes sense to say that in some degree one could say we didn't do anything in terms of activism. I mean, there was no protest, there was no kind of we just came together on a global level and had dialogues and ceremonies and meditation. That's what we did. So what is this? What does this mean in terms of activism? Activism is about changing the world. So is this kind of a nice thing where we feel better and it feels nice to be connected to everyone? Or is it just that? I'm deeply convinced that is not the case. I'm deeply convinced we did something, and I mostly can talk from my own experience, but also from the experience of quite some people I talked to, that there was a living network of connection that was created between people who themselves are deeply connected, both to the sacred dimension in their own world, maybe Aborigines in Australia and their own kind of form of sacred relationship to the land, may be a Benedictine monk like Brother David Steiner Rust in his Catholic spirituality. They were all people who in themselves were deeply related to this dimension in one way or the other. And they were all people who in one way or the other were deeply related to the social, ecological dimension of our world and the pain that humans inflict on each other, that we inflict on Earth, that society, economics, finance industry, you name it, all that was part of where they are also connected to. And everyone who was part of this 24 hours was very interested to connect with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it changed my relationship and my capacity to respond to whatever I need to respond to also here in Germany, and in the particular political, ecological environment that I'm in, with the communities I'm in. And I know it changed, and it only strengthened our Filipino friends to have this healing ceremony that it witnessed by all of us. And I know, because so many people said, so many people were strengthened and deeply touched by being part of this healing ceremony of our Filipino friends. So there's something where, on a very subtle level, but very real, structures of healing, of sacred healing, of strengthening, of aliveness, were empowered by doing this. And this is a form that in itself, it's not everything, because you need all the dimensions. You need political action, you need social action, you need all forms. But this is an integral part that changes something in a dimension that usually activists don't see, are not aware of, don't focus on. And I'm just very happy that also many people that you invited as being guests are people like Ank, for example, who also have been part of the One World bearing witness, and are in themselves example of holding this in their own way. And I'm just very deeply curious to learn from them and to hear from them how they see that, how they see the dimension. I'm sure they see it somehow different than I do, and have this as a global learning process. How to do this and find out what we are doing is something that I'm personally very excited to do.
I agree, and that's who we're hoping to invite more of these folks to engage with us in this forum, in this open forum. I would also suggest that I feel that sacred activism also works in a different way, and in a way that can be called a subtle activism. That while most activists are looking to transform the material realities that divide us, the real income disparity, the fact of war and conflict, to change laws, change regulations, and so forth. That this kind of sacred activism, or what we were trying to do, or working with for One World Bearing Witness, was to really call on a different dimension of reality, to bring us together in a way that allows us to see that there is really one humanity, that we each have different strengths, we have different struggles. Some of the different struggles that we have are incredibly important, or many of them are, for us all to recognize, to recognize how profound these differences are between us, and even more profound is the unity that we share. And that we share that unity because of our common humanity, because of the fact that we share a planet, and because we share consciousness or spirit at the most fundamental level. But we have, in the development of human culture on this planet, we developed as cultures in different places that had regional engagement. But in terms of the whole, we have not been rubbing up against each other in prior centuries or thousands over the 1,000 years of cultural development on this planet. We've come to the point where we are really up against each other. And I mean, we're just like rubbing up against each other with our different beliefs, the different ways that we have defined what human is. I mean, I'm sure many of you are aware that I know that this is true among Native Americans, and I'm sure it's true among many tribal cultures, that the word for human is the word for your tribe. That what Sioux means is the human. And this kind of this sense that cultures have grown up in spaces that have allowed themselves to flower, but have not entailed a kind of confrontation with deeply different beliefs, except for with your neighbors, that we're now at a very different place because of that. And because of this way that human beings have developed, we don't have, we have developed this capacity for othering each other in a way that creates deep division and deep separation. And while this was also true in tribal times, for sure, at this point, with the kind of weapons that we have and the kinds of means that we have of creating conflict and destruction, there is a way that we need to see each other more and more deeply as one, as human. And that doesn't involve skipping over the differences and saying that the differences don't matter, we're all one anyway. That's a form of spiritual bypassing. But to be able to face the things that we have done to each other on this planet, and as neighbors or as visitors from afar, and to be able to look at these things and to be able to feel the humanness underneath them and the way that has been hurt or distorted or endangered, the effect on the planet, to be able to feel that and to do that together. I mean, this is part of what we were trying to do with One World Bearing Witness. Can we bear witness to this all together, and in the process create a deeper sense of our common humanness in a way that doesn't deny history, that doesn't deny difference, that honors both, and also calls us to respect each other in a deeper way. Because I don't think that we will ever get beyond the kinds of divisions that we can see on this planet if we don't deeply recognize, I don't mean this as a belief system, but at the guts of ourselves, recognize each other as fully human. And without that, until that becomes a before thought response to life and being here on this planet together, it will be very difficult for us to create something different. So One World Bearing Witness is just a homeopathic dose of attempting to make that happen.
And also, I'm looking forward to do this together in this form that we're doing, because as maybe many of you know, the core of our work is what we call this emergent dialogue and higher we work. And we also, as we tried to do, and I think also succeeded to some degree to do with One World Bearing Witness, to use modern technology like this computer screen and Zoom that we are in, to connect exactly in what you are talking about right now. To be able, and I was, as I'm finding it out right now again, seeing your faces and feeling the connection, I'm so deeply touched by the fact that we can connect globally as we do right now in the depth of consciousness and our humanness, by coming together in this way and finding ways of dialogue and dialoguing that allows to hold this experience that underneath everything, we are not divided.
Mm.
That's something I will never be able to really grasp with my mind, because my mind is a machine to hold difference. But we can hold this in a live situation like this, even with computer technology and internet technology, as a deep realization that is the starting point to engage with each other, to deal with differences, to deal with injustice, to deal with the global crisis that we're in, and to build this field together with you and also together with our guests,
Mm-hmm.
and to learn from each other, because we need also all the different perspectives. There's not only the white European American male perspective that is the dominant perspective on global issues that we have right now. Although I appreciate it also. It's not necessarily a wrong one, but it's one-sided. It's one-sided and it's dominant. It's dominating the other perspectives. So to create fields where the different perspectives can merge, find their shared root, find their spiritual ground from different perspectives, and find together ways of responding. By hearing also from people who do respond, in may it be South America, may it be in India, may it be in the Philippines, may it be in Europe, may it be in North America, find from their cultural backgrounds, from the wisdom, the particular and also distinct wisdom of their cultural backgrounds, ways to respond, and create a global forum where all these dimensions, from the dimension of prior unity to the dimension of communion, as we are talking, living, dialogue in communion, and also intellectual distinctions that have to be made. Injustice, global economic mechanisms and systems that we have to question. Also, not shying away from the tough questions, and being aware that the difficulties, and there are also kind of opposite views on that. Hold this together and finding ways where we can start to do this with you and with our guests. I just have no doubt that this will be an amazing learning context.
Mm. Absolutely, and I think that's I think that's what we have to do now, is really learn from each other, and learn from each other about how about what I was just looking at some of the videos that we did from earlier Global Dialogue Labs, and uh, uh, Charles Eisenstein says that the most radical question or way that one can engage in activism is by asking the question, what is it like to be you? That if we were to encounter each other on this planet, in this dialogue context, in this forum that we're creating here, with the question, what is it like to be you? That we can create a context in which our differences in what it is that we each have learned from being in our places, our different spots on this earth, and which also brings me back to one of the original starting points for the One World in Dialogue work, which is our overarching umbrella. It came from a recognition that or an excerpt, a small piece of writing that we heard someone speak about, that Sri Aurobindo wrote, where Sri Aurobindo said that, basically looked at the earth as a living whole, saying that each continent had its own spirit, its own uniqueness, out of which arose different kinds of human beings that each have a wisdom, a key, a way of engaging with life and reality that is an important piece of the puzzle of what it means to be human as a whole. And his vision was, and this was one that resonated with Thomas and I, with Thomas and me very, very, very strongly, was, can we create a world in which the various wisdoms that we hold that have come from our different experiences of being human, and can we create a living whole where those differences are, and those different forms of wisdom are called to the fore and seen as strengths that are needed by all of us on this planet. The strengths that come from Africa, from East Asia, from South America, from Europe, are all necessary for the full functioning of this living Earth and the human beings and all the species on it. Can we do something to move in that direction? Can we do this together? That's our hope with this forum.
Maybe before we also start a broader conversation on this, do you want to say some more details what people can expect? Is there more also on a practical level that maybe is interesting to know how this will unfold in the coming year?
Well, I think practically, I'm working right now to pull together people for the whole year. Any suggestions you have of people that you think that we should have here in the forum, I deeply appreciate. But I think what we would love to do and love it is to try to create a really diverse container here that can hold this kind of difference. We would like to help create a container for dialogue here amongst us all that can hold diversity in unity. And what that means is that we want to have we will hear from our guests, and we want to find a way that we can hold a dialogue together. And by that, I do mean hold it together. That we want to have, to help develop the capacity for human beings to come together out of the sense of unity and in deep respectful curiosity with each other, and see what is possible to emerge from that. I see this as the Global Dialogue Lab is a lab. It's a laboratory, and it depends on all of the people who are participating in it to give it that quality of experimentation and exploration that is so important to developing this this context that can hold what it is that we're speaking about here. Mm-hmm. So there will be working time in these evenings, evenings here, mornings in many parts of the world, that will allow us to engage in a collective learning process.
I don't know if you would go so far, but I really would like to emphasize that this is a practice together. That this is there is a level, of course, where this is also about learning in the sense of getting new inputs, learning information, learning other people. but it is also a practice of communion, of coming together, being aware that a dialogical space, any dialogical space, any space of relationship, has in itself a subtle sacred quality, and it's up to us to be aware of it. It's up to us to honor it, and it's up to us to work it. And the way we work with dialogue is very much also focused on the awareness of this relational space. And it's an awareness that in itself is a subtle activity, because it's mentally I cannot be aware of this, right? Because this sphere is not a mental sphere, it's an existential consciousness sphere. So in that, what we are doing, and what we also do in our other dialogue courses, more in depth and more hands-on, but we're trying to develop this also in this context, is an experiential part of practicing this collective consciousness that is developing in any kind, and also, which I have to say it again and again because it is the case, surprisingly, in this internet-related computer field of relationship. I am sitting here, I'm seeing you, and whatever someone else may say, I'm deeply convinced there is a powerful field between us. Although it's just the two of us talking at this point, it's we change. There's something by our shared intention to come together for this purpose that we are, that has a subtle reality, and to work with this, to be aware of this, and to cultivate this is part of what we try to do here.
And I would like to add in that context, therefore, dialogue is a form of sacred activism. Dialogue is a form of sacred activism that is calling us to recognize, not from our minds, but from a deeper place, that we share something of life here together. That each of us, wherever we are on this planet, is creating is part of a constellation of shared intention, as you just mentioned, of humanness that is that wants to bring wholeness to fruition here, to bring alive what is sacred between us, and that acknowledges that there is something between us that is life itself, that is precious, that is alive, and that we can cultivate that together from our different places and different vantage points. And in that, we're trying in that we're working with a practice of creating wholeness, creating a wholeness that is not flat and unidimensional, but that is multidimensional and contains the differences that we hold in our life experience, our cultural experience, on this large and also very, very tiny and fragile, beautiful planet that we share. So I think even with that, we should maybe open up and invite you into this conversation. So we'll invite you to turn your cameras on
and you see on the lower left side of your computer screen this microphone that has a red line on top of it. You can unmute yourself by clicking on this microphone, and I would encourage everyone to keep yourself muted when you don't talk and unmute yourself when you do talk. And we are here 33 lines open, so let's try to have this kind of a self-organizing way of dialoguing. So whoever wants to come in first, feel free, and we are very much looking forward to your contributions, to your questions, to your insights. Whoever wants to start, please feel free to do so.
And just keeping on with what touched you, with what you're hearing, your response. Yes, Andrew, go ahead, open up.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm loving the conversation, taking tons of notes. Thank you so much. I almost unmuted myself and put a big yes in, Thomas, when you were speaking a moment ago about how real the online space is. It really is. And I think that part of the reason for that may be that while I'm looking at pixels on the screen, I am in my body here, as you are there, and as everybody on the call. We're all in our bodies. So we are embodying the consciousness and the existential reality here. So yes, it's very real. It's very real. I just wanted to kind of underscore that, and to say how I've been following both of your work over years and really appreciating it. So it's just great to be saying hi from here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. I think that embodied nature of this is one of the most exciting and surprising things, and that we can really touch each other in this way, and feel each other in this space, even though we're all over the world, and I find that deeply moving. You know, can we? It presents us with an extraordinary possibility. Can we create can we use this cold technology? Can we warm it up so that it holds the human heart? And it's very exciting to do that with all of you.
Hello, Elizabeth and Thomas.
Hi, Michael.
This is Michael, and just want to say thank you for putting this on, and to everyone for being here. It's really cool to see this tool being used like this by such young people from all over the world.
Yeah, thank you.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you. And actually, if people don't mind, we'd love to have everybody on camera if that's possible. I know sometimes people roll out of bed and then get to these calls, and so may not want to be on camera. But yeah, you're welcome to have your cameras on so that we can get more of that sense of being in these different spaces and with different, live human beings.
I mean, it's completely fine if there is any reason not to have the camera on, but just to say it's great to see you.
Yeah. Oh, someone has no camera, Mike. Yeah. That's of course okay.
That's one of the good reasons to have not a camera on.
Yeah. But it's also something that we've noticed before, but it's always so powerful to recognize that it's not just that through these little windows that we have in front of us, that we're seeing into cultures also, that we have human beings who are embodying a place and time, a context, and that we're sharing these from different spaces around this planet, and that's very exciting.
Yeah, I just want to add one other thing to that this technology we're using, to do this just even 10 years ago, we would have all had to have a satellite truck outside of our houses, getting the signals up to the satellite, going to an aggregator, combining it all into one signal, and be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we're doing it for essentially free. Yeah, and so this technology, when learned to be used like people are learning right now, and we're learning to do this together around the world, is going to be hugely transformative and powerful in creating a new world.
Yeah. No, thank you, Mike. To be honest, I feel this is also part of our mission, because usually people who are very close to technology are not very into consciousness. And people who are very much into consciousness have not the most direct relationship to technology, and for good reasons. But there is a capacity to bring this together that really allows consciousness work to really enter in a different dimension. And just to pioneer this together, I find that in itself is an exciting thing to do. And just to see everyone here, I mean, John Harvey, to see you smile on the screen, and to see Sibylle and Peter, it's just I'm just always amazed how real this is. I mean, it's called virtual reality. I'm sorry, it's not the right word for me. It's computer supported reality, but this is a human-to-human meeting, and I find it very touching that this is possible, and I'm very excited we can do something with this, and we can do something with this as a form of global sacred activism.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi. We're Tony and Hank, and we live in the Netherlands. And well, I feel so deeply moved and grateful for this opportunity to say hi to everyone, and all over the world. I see in the chats all kinds of countries at the same time, and there's no government between us. There's no overhead. We're just people living here, taking care of everything nearby, but even on the whole scale of the world. It moves me every time deeply to know that I'm not alone.
Right.
I want to say thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. It's very touching to me too, also.
Yes.
Well, I will step in, and I thank you, Elizabeth and Thomas, so much for opening the door for us to gather like this. And it's a very moving experience for me, and I love this technology that we're putting together, and to be able to see your faces and to see your smile, Elizabeth, and to see people when they're talking. It is just so connecting. And one of the things that came to me, Thomas, I really appreciated your two aspects of what you see of sacred activism. I've been thinking for some years of spiritual activism, and somehow sacred activism seems to get more to the core of it for me. And the two aspects that you brought out, that the sacred needs us, and that there's a kind of manner of activism that honors the sacred.
Yeah.
So it's, and I really love that definition so much. And in your talking about the event last month, which I wasn't able to make, what came to me was that the difference that I learned from my spiritual teachers years ago between being and doing. That in the West, we live in such a doing culture, and we think of doing, and it's a thing aspect. We do something, and that's activism. And yet, so much of our doing isn't grounded in being. And to me, it seems to be a difference in our cosmology, that we haven't yet stepped into the quantum cosmology, where everything is connected and everything is always in motion. And So I see that as an aspect of the sacred activism, is learning to step into that and share that story. And one of the, I live in the metropolitan area that's closest to where Standing Rock was. So I know a lot of people who spent time there. I've heard from a number of the native leaders from there. And in the past year, I have met an Ojibwe elder, a woman who's trained as a wisdom keeper by her people and is a water protector.
Mm-hmm.
And I've started going on every Sunday morning. We meet on the Mississippi River
Mm-hmm.
and the water prayer ceremony. And a little different perspective, Elizabeth, you saw what they were doing in Standing Rock as being connected with a concrete object, the water.
Mm-hmm.
And my perspective on it is a little bit different, is that they were seeing all of the relationships. The water is the lifeblood of Mother Earth.
Mm.
And Standing Rock was started by 4 women who were water protectors. And they described what they were doing as not resistance or protest,
Mm-hmm.
but they were being prayer in the world. And that's what I experience on Sunday mornings. I mean, year round to go there, so it's going to be below zero tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
On the Mississippi. And I forget which of you brought it up, but I realized that what I'm experiencing there is communion.
Mm-hmm.
And I am so grateful for you for starting this process for us to experience that communion together. And if you're interested, I will approach Sharon, who is this Ojibwe elder, and see if she'd be interested in
That'd be wonderful.
joining us, being one of the presenters on it.
That'd be
One.
great, Lloyd.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I wonder if she's the same water protector and water walker that I've a friend of mine has suggested putting me in touch with. She's a woman who takes water at the source of the river and walks the length of the river and then pours the source water into the river where it opens up in New Orleans, and to remind the river, because it gets polluted on the way, of its source, of its pure source.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful work coming from a very different and very profound cosmology.
Yes, that's the woman. Her name is Sharon Day,
Mm-hmm.
and she's been a water walker for about 14 years.
Wonderful.
Wow.
That'd be great.
Looking forward to talk to her, because also what you said before, Lloyd, about our cosmology, part of this subtle activism of doing this, what we are doing together, is also to penetrate our Western modern cosmology just by being exposed to other forms of cosmology, like indigenous cosmology, that has not gone the way we went. I'm not someone who is saying that we went all wrong, because I think the whole process of individuation and also rationality has something very positive and powerful for humanity. But I see the need to reconnect to something that we got lost on the way. And there's something I experience right now, which is a rise of indigenous wisdom. Also, because as ironic as it may be, the indigenous wisdom leaders are connecting via modern technology and connecting their old wisdom in this form that, as we are talking right now, there's a merging of 21st century technology and thousands years old wisdom, and coming together and finding an integration process. And to be part of this integration process is part of the activism that we have to do. And in that sense, I'm more than looking forward to hear speak.
Mm. Actually, it's really interesting because two of the indigenous elders that and leaders that we spoke with for One World Bearing Witness, Grandmother Flor de Mayo, and oh, I'm gonna a Tasmanian elder from Hobart in Tasmania, and I'm blanking on her name right now. But they both said that they have gotten messages, or they've gotten intuitions, messages, a deep sense that they have to go global, that their message, it's not enough to work one-on-one or in a small context right now, that they have to reach out as far as they can. And I think Grandmother Flor de Mayo got the intuition that she has to go to the masses. She said to go beyond to forums that bring in a global context. And I think there's been something happening, I think, among Indigenous elders and among Indigenous leaders for the last 15, 20 years that is really starting to I think really to kind of gain momentum and really move. And I think the Western peoples, our interest in these Indigenous cosmologies and Indigenous practices is really also creating a real momentum, because we know that we've lost something. We know that we have cut off from something that is essential to life on this planet. And not that makes us guilty, wrong, bad, et cetera, but it calls us to develop, to grow, to move.
I'll just jump in for a moment. Thank you, Elizabeth and Thomas. It's great to see everybody.
Great to see you.
And yeah, great to see you too. I was, thank you, Lord. That was actually very beautiful hearing about the mother, the river walker. And also, Thomas, what you said near the beginning about this living network. I'm very struck about how much of this is about relationship. Mm-hmm. Our relationship with each other, our relationship with the other land masses, continents, our relationship with the earth. And the word that's been coming up for me a lot lately, and it's so simple, but I'm just getting a sense of it being not simple, is family. Mm-hmm. Who is my family has been in my mind a lot lately. And I have family, but in a way it's like, no, and I don't mean them. Mm-hmm. It's like, who is my family? And this group of people, this land, this is my mother, this is my father, this is this network, this living network of people and the land, the rivers, the mountains. Somehow this is family that is living and is holding and is engaged with what life is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Elizabeth, I was really especially moved by your invoking of the fact that we feel like we're embedded in a culture that denies that anything lies in this special category of sacredness. And in a way, this is all being brought about by this contrast between that state of affairs and the undeniable reality that you also said, that somehow everybody walks around holding at least something that without which human life is impoverished. So in a way, it feels to me like this work is really about, this activism is about taking that sacred and placing it, taking away the veil and taking it out of the periphery and placing it at the center of our lives in a way that we feel many cultures even still do today, and many more may have done in years past. I think in that we have to encounter the question, why are so many of us and why are we collectively being pulled toward that which does divide? How has this actually happened, that this has come to be the paradigm of our modern society, holding us all in its sort of thrall and keeping the sort of veil in our mind that blinds us from seeing ourselves all the time? So I feel that one person came to mind as you were speaking, who might be really interesting, and I don't know him. You might have heard of him. His name is Derek Black. And he's a guy who had been groomed from birth. He's the godson of David Duke, who's this really well-known white supremacist here in the U.S.
Yeah.
I'll send you a little article in the Washington Post from some months ago that describes this young man's journey as the heir apparent of this movement, to what happens to him when he goes to college in Florida and has this tremendous turnaround.
Wow.
It's really, he might be a fascinating person to bring, because I think getting deeper into this dynamic of how we create and hold the opposite, the other, why we do that, and how do we loosen up those veil, that sense of separation. There's something that's there that I feel like we have to encounter in order to place that sacred back into our life. So just wanted to share that.
Oh, thanks, Josh. That would, I'd love to hear about this young man. I mean, that's fascinating. Thomas read an article in the German newspaper. It was the Zeit, wasn't it? That has stayed with me. I didn't read it, he did, but he told me about it, and it just has stayed with me. It was about someone who was basically a neo-Nazi here in Germany, and he talked about how it was that he shifted out of it, and that it didn't come from rational argument or better ideas or whatever. It came from deeper humanness. But the courage that takes is something extraordinary. That the first kind of you could say first crack came when a professor at his university expressed deep pain and sorrow that this bright young man was being trapped by these ideas in such separation and violence. And it was
very similar. Yeah, it's a very similar story for Derek, who
interesting.
He kept his identity undercover in college, but then was outed. And he had been friends and hanging around with a couple of guys, young Jewish guys. And after the whole thing blew up and he was getting ostracized on campus, they invited him over for dinner, a little dinner party.
Wow.
And he was just so touched by their humanity. And that was it. It just sort of, the break came that way. So.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, because he said, if this German guy, if this professor would argue against him, he knew all the arguments on the other side. And if people would hate him, that would even empower his own identity of being hated because who he is. But seeing this professor and seeing his human connection, he said at the time when it happened is after he gave a talk in the class. After a time, the way he consciously related it, that this guy is a loser.
But it bugged him.
But it never left him, because he said one of the fundamental positions in life of this neo-Nazi identity is that everyone hates everyone. And everyone is basically just, it's a battle, everyone against everyone. And if someone doesn't do that, it just undermines something of your fascist identity in this. And then, just to give 2 lines more of the story, he got into a relationship, and the relationship became with a woman, and this relationship became so real that it was just too much for him, because he was not used to have this kind of intimacy, and he responded to that to go to therapy. And in therapy, he realized that many people that he kind of held as his heroes in his child time, because they were the strong, whatever kind of guys, were the very person that held him down from his own aliveness as a human being. And then so said all of a sudden, also to this therapy process, all this idea didn't have any attraction for him anymore. It was not a rational process. It was a process of relationship.
Do you remember the title of the article? We'll try to find it.
Yeah.
We'll try to find it because it's really. But when you think about that, and I mean, oftentimes, you know, in the world that we're in right now, and certainly after the U.S. election in 2016, things that have happened in Hungary and in Turkey and Poland, yeah. I mean, also here in Germany, I mean, things that are happening around the world that are scary. It's like, wow, what's happening? You know, where's our what are human beings standing for these days? You know, what does it mean to be human? How are we developing that? It makes me think about how the Christian martyrs defeated the Roman Empire. You know, this kind of radical, transcendent love stood in the face of incredible brutality, and it's like, wow. You know, people say love is the only answer, but we often say that so quickly and so easily. Love is the only answer. But I mean, the kind of courage that we're talking about in the face of this kind of deep disconnection that creates this kind of violence is really, I think is really deep spiritual work, profound spiritual work for all of us in all of our encounters with other human beings.
And to bring it back again to this series of conversations that we will have, and this form of technology that we are using, that's something that I find so powerful, because meeting you as I meet you right now, Josh, for example, and everyone else, face to face, that's so completely different than reading the best article or seeing the best documentary, whatever, about anything in the world. Not to say that this is all great stuff, but there's something in the face-to-face, human-to-human meeting in the same space, even if it's space like that, it allows something in our relationship to flower that only happens in relationship. So there's love. It takes away this kind of sentimental connotation of love. It just allows us to cultivate our humanness, togetherness in shared presence, and to do this and be able to do this on a global scale as we're doing right now, because we are where we are in different continents, and we develop something and having the vision that there may be networks of living relationships that hold something where behind everyone, single one of us, we are not just our individuality. Everyone holds the whole culture one comes from. And when we are meeting, it's not we only as persons are meeting, we as cultures are meeting too. And to allow this to unfold itself, it's out of our control how it will unfold. But we can cultivate this. It gives me a lot of hope that we can unleash very powerful positive forces in what is needed here.
Thomas, thank you so much for that. Just the new ways looking at it and seeing it is, you know, you talked about the sacred, and I for a long time have believed that all the great spiritual masters, what they're teaching us is to be how to become more fully human.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't really thought of that as the sacredness of being deeply human.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the activism we were talking about, being able to
Right.
move into that space.
Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Owen, did you want to say something? I see that your mic is unmuted, but we cannot hear you. So maybe there's some other setting that you can change, because I see that you are muted, but we still cannot hear your voice.
while Owen's figuring that out, I'm just going to share a link to a website called 7 Billion Others. It's amazing. It shares stories from people all over the world. I'll put that in the chat. It's
Great, thank you.
incredible.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. No, Owen, unfortunately, we cannot hear. But, I see two options. One is that maybe you want to restart your connection. That's one thing. Or the other is if you want to just share it via the chat window, then we can read it together. Well,
Okay.
great.
Another person I would recommend is Nora Bateston. I just finished reading her book, Small Arcs of Larger Circles, something like that. And her whole thing is about complex systems and learning together.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, our relationship to the world is learning.
Mm-hmm.
And she did join with us in a Q&A on Jeff Carrera's course, so she's willing to talk to people.
Okay, great.
She's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Denise. No, I mean that's it. It's interesting. I mean, the world is so complex, and how things it's part of why this inquiry into activism and different forms of activism and subtle activism and sacred activism, I think, is so interesting to me. Is that our models for change or change making are really based in like Newtonian mechanics or something. You know, they're very institutional and very rigid, and we don't know. The way change happens is the way life or principles of life happen, or through emergence, through things that are beyond this kind of linear forms of logic. And I think it's very unknown what it will take to transform our planet. And I think the more deeply we're rooted in that we don't know what's possible, and we sense a possibility. Holding both of those together, I think, is a very is a very powerful way to invite an opening that we don't know where it will go.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I really agree with that, and I experienced that focusing, which is developed by Eugene Gendlin, as something that allows us to access that new unknown place through the bodily felt sense, which also has to do very much with accepting the wisdom of the human body.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that you said that that dialogue is a form of sacred activism, because I teach focusing and nonviolent communication, and it feels like that's my form of activism, because when people don't have those tools, the dialogue becomes there's so many places to kind of get stuck in dialogue, and when you have the tools, things can flow more easily.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very much so.
Yeah. I love Gendlin's work. I found it very, really remarkable. It had quite an impact on me a long time ago.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're familiar with it.
Yeah, it's that.
Yeah, it really gives us the way to be with that unknown and to allow it to develop into something new.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, how we recognize resonance. I mean, it's and in recognizing resonance, that we can create new truths together in a certain way. And
new what's together?
Truths.
Truths, yes, truths, yes, very much. New truths. We don't have to be stuck in the old truths that don't necessarily work.
Right. Yeah. His name is Eugene Gendlin, Gendlin. right?
Gendlin.
Endlin, and the name of the book is Focusing, his first book.
Right. And there's a whole website actually with many, many more. His further development of from focusing is the philosophy of the implicit, which kind of explains how what's implicit in the human body can be accessed in order to find those new truths. And the website focusing.org has almost all of Gendlin's writings, except for the book Focusing. Many interesting articles that open your mind to the practice. But again, as you're saying here, it is a practice. It's something that we learn to do, especially with a partner. So it encourages dialogue. And I also love what you're saying about the interconnectedness of that Zoom allows us, because I teach these classes and I feel this intimacy with people in Hong Kong or Bolivia or El Salvador, where it's an intimacy that can be achieved much more easily than if I had to fly, spending all those hydrocarbons and getting used to the altitude and staying in a hotel. And so I really love this nervous system of the planet that we're developing through technology.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Owen, did you write something? No. Okay.
No, because we still cannot hear you, unfortunately. Here it comes.
Okay.
Are we?
Sure. Hi, Thomas and Elizabeth and everyone here. Thank you for your sharing. This is the first time for me to be here with you. Well, welcome. I was introduced to you by my friend Stuart Wyndham. We do dialogues together. It's been for about 5 years now over the internet. I enjoyed being here with you today. I feel good about this. I was going to introduce myself over voice, but the mic failed, unfortunately. I am in from Malta, but I live and work in London. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you so much, Owen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Owen. Yeah,
Thanks.
great.
Great to have you here.
Yeah. Good. Good.
I'll just add,
You muted yourself again, Andrew, I think.
thank you. Yeah, something that somebody mentioned yesterday, so true for me, I'll mention it, that he tries to be on as many calls, global connection calls as he can, and he finds, as I do, that we have access to connecting into that space when not on the calls. So it is a consciousness that becomes more available to us. And I like the distinction between reading David Duke's son's story and the actual experience, but that experience becomes more present to us the more that we're accessing it. And it's sort of, I guess, dreaming of a world where we're all the time aware of our hive that we're connected to and in. So we're on the way.
Yeah, I think that's another, I think, hoped for outcome from our events like One World Bearing Witness. That what we hear from people is that after the event that there is an imprint of wholeness, of awareness that's not specific. It's not like I know exactly what's happening in the news in Kenya or in Singapore, but I have a felt sense of that they are, and that there are human beings, that we're holding a whole that is filled with human beings who are in all kinds of different places, you know, in terms of struggling with what it means to be human.
Yeah.
Or I would say, or like Brother David Steinelross said in the last piece in One World Bearing Witness, that every human being on this planet has to struggle in some ways with the mystery of life. And we do that in very often in very different ways, and sometimes even in ways that involve cutting off from the vulnerability that calls us to. But knowing that we are all sharing that together around the world in these different places is to have a felt sense of that is a profound transformation.
And also in relationship what you're saying, Andrew, it's the difference that we are creating by these global connection calls is that these are not news anymore. These are human people.
Yeah.
And one has really to, at least I have to slow down to let in the difference. Something happening in south of Australia being news to me that I read somewhere or see on a news channel, or it's something that happens in the human relationship with someone I'm aware of, I am in relationship with. It's a completely different world disappears in for me. It's one world that is the news world, and there's another world that is the connected world. And part of this, the subtle activism is that we are creating networks of connectedness. And this is necessary to really allow something to be strengthened in a world that is mostly ruled by abstract forms of news or abstract system realities and not human connectedness. And in that sense, that's another dimension where I really see this. This can have an impact.
Thank you for the words interconnectedness, and Elizabeth also for this expression struggle with the mystery of life. I'm reminded of a talk by about a 45-year-old person who's a musician, teacher, and youth worker, who described the situation in his youth in which he was discovered. He was spending more time out of the classroom than in the classroom, and said later on, or from today's perspective, he thinks he could have become a terrorist. But there was one person who came down the hall and really saw him. And the title of his talk was "I Am Because I Was Seen." And I think there's what I'm saying now too is I'm also expanding this whole idea to young people and even children. They do sense something in others, in us individually. I'm reminded of some scenes with my granddaughter, for example, who's now 4. I have the feeling she senses some of this. It's at a feeling level, it's at a heart level. But this guy was who held this talk. You know, he was a teenager at the time, and that was the critical moment of his life. And someone really looked at him, and he felt he was seen for who he was. And that started him off on a biographical journey, in which he now works with young people from different cultures and brings them together. Right? I was reminded of this by your key words here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Good to see you.
Good to see you again, too. I've been off for a while. I've been around a bit. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we should let's shift into small groups so you can get to know each other, or some you can get to know some of the group in a better way, and don't, yeah, and continue talking about these questions, these issues, these insights.
I think there's so much and so rich what you talked about. It's a lot to just continue in the small groups, and I think we just leave them open again. So we will kind of open these groups, and you're happy to join, and we leave it up to you how long you want to continue there. So from our side, we keep the line open if you want to continue for longer. Otherwise, the official time ending is kind of in half an hour, as you wish, and you can also kind of find out together in your small group how long you want to go there.
Yeah, and feel free to feel free to write some of your insights on the Global Dialogue Lab Facebook page. That would be great. And I should have this recording ready in a couple of days, so you have plenty of time to invite people to the next one. Lloyd said he would like to do that, and actually that would be wonderful. I mean, if you have a friend, particularly somebody who's from a different culture, or someplace a bit far from you, maybe somebody you know on Facebook, maybe a relative, maybe whoever, a former colleague or coworker, invite them to come to the forum. And it's not so scary. Sometimes people are intimidated by participating, but feel free to, it'd be great to expand the circle and see how much reach we can get. So I'll be making that video available very, very soon. And on the 21st, on Sunday, we have our first free seminar where we're going to be going into the question of what is bearing witness. We're going to go through, Lloyd, since you missed it, we're going to go through the whole 24 hours of One World Bearing Witness, so that we can go much deeper into some of the beautiful offerings that were made during the 24 hours that often sped by in that 24-hour cycle, and to explore some of the deeper and complex questions that arise from these different contexts. Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Thomas.
Yeah. Thank you, Sibylla.
Thank you, Sibylla.